Imagine it. A freezing, incredibly tense morning. The biting wind is howling, and the ground around you is blanketed in pure, untouched snow. You can almost feel the chill in the air, right? Well, this icy scene is the starting point for the story of the flower of the buried wood. We're talking about the solitary Tairo, Ii Naosuke. So let's set the scene. It's March 24th, 1860, just outside the massive, imposing Sakuradamon gate of Edo Castle. Suddenly, that eerie silence of a snowy morning is completely shattered. You hear the sharp, terrifying clash of steel. A violent ambush unfolds out of nowhere, and within minutes, that pristine white snow is stained crimson. The target of this brutal attack? Japan's Tairo, which basically translates to the chief minister. This guy held dictatorial, absolute emergency powers. He was essentially the ultimate human shield for the shogun. So you have to ask yourself, why was the absolute ruler of a peaceful regime that had lasted for over 260 years brutally cut down on his morning commute? Let's dive into it.
Part 1, Assassins in the Snow.
Part 2, The Buried Wood Days.
Okay, to really understand the bloody chaos of that morning, we actually have to hit rewind and go back to a place of complete, almost eerie stillness. Just look at this timeline. Born in 1815, Ii Naosuke was his father's 14th son. Seriously, the 14th. Now, in the super strict samurai class system back then, if you were a 14th son and no one adopted you, you had literally zero political future. None. So at age 17, he moves into this modest, totally isolated house. He's living on a tiny stipend of just 300 koku, which is basically a bare minimum survival allowance paid in rice. He even named his house Umareginoya, the House of the Buried Wood. And get this, he stayed there, completely forgotten by the outside world, for 15 long years. That is, until his older brother unexpectedly passed away, and suddenly, he was the heir. But here's the thing you need to know about those 15 years in the shadows. He didn't just sit around wallowing in self-pity or wasting his youth. Not at all. He rigorously trained his mind and spirit. He practiced Zen Buddhism, pushing himself to achieve profound enlightenment. He absolutely mastered the tea ceremony, eventually getting so good he founded his own branch. He immersed himself in classical waka poetry, and on top of all that, he honed his martial arts, specifically Ia Jutsu, which is the lightning-fast art of drawing a sword. Through all this extreme discipline, Naosuke built an incredibly stoic, highly logical, and deeply resilient mindset. And I think this poem he wrote brilliantly captures his state of mind back then. Looking at the world from afar, I am like a buried piece of wood with no heart. It's kind of beautiful, right? It really shows his total, peaceful acceptance of a quiet, politically irrelevant life. He had completely found peace in the shadows. But as you'll see, history was about to violently drag him right onto the main stage. Part 3. Sudden Rise to Power. So that quiet piece of the tea room? Yeah, it's about to be completely shattered. Boom. Suddenly, it's the 1850s, and Japan is staring down a terrifying dual-headed monster of a crisis. First up, the American black ships arrive. These massive foreign warships are aggressively demanding that Japan open its borders after centuries of strict isolation. The threat of Western colonization is looming, and it is very, very real. And as if that wasn't enough, the shogun, the supreme military dictator of Japan, is dying, and he doesn't have an heir. So the power vacuum at the very top of the government is gaping wide open at the worst possible time. This double crisis triggers a massive, messy political war, which basically boils down to a Team A versus Team B situation. On one side, you have the Nanki faction. They're all about strict tradition and bloodline, so they support a young boy simply because he's the closest blood relative. And their leader? Yep, our former recluse, Ii Naosuke. On the other side, you have the Hitoshibashi faction. They're pushing for reform and backing an older, brilliant, but more distantly related candidate. Shaped by his years of strict, orderly isolation, Naosuke fought fiercely to protect the established rules. To him, tradition was everything. And then, in April 1858, the absolute unthinkable happens. Ii Naosuke is officially appointed Tairo. The literal nobody who spent 15 years in the buried wood is suddenly handed the ultimate emergency dictatorial powers over all of Japan. It's a massive leap. Let's see how this sudden power builds into a complete explosion. Part 4. Solitary Decision and Purge. The pressure on Naosuke is intense and immediate. He is backed into what looks like an impossible corner. The US consul is aggressively demanding that Japan sign a trade treaty right now. Meanwhile, over in Kyoto, the emperor passionately despises foreign influence and absolutely refuses to give his imperial consent for the treaty. Naosuke is trapped. Does he defy the emperor, which was an unthinkable sin back then? Or does he wait around, do nothing, and risk war and colonization by foreign gunboats? Everyone knew what had just happened in China with the Opium War, and Japan was terrified of sharing that fate. And this right here brings us to his solitary, ruthlessly pragmatic resolve. Naosuke famously believed that to protect the nation, someone has to step up, take the blame, and take action, even if it goes against the emperor's will. Relying on that unshakable mental fortitude he built over 15 years of Zen meditation, Naosuke made the call. He went ahead and signed the treaty without the emperor's permission. He did it knowing full well it would make him the most hated man in Japan. Over 100. That is the staggering number of people who got caught up in the severe backlash and the terrifying political crackdown that Naosuke unleashed in response to the anger over his decision. This massive, heavy-handed crackdown became known to history as the Ansei Purge. He ruthlessly suppressed literally all political opposition. Brilliant reformist scholars were executed. Powerful rival lords were stripped of their influence and placed under permanent house arrest. Now, listen, we aren't here to take sides in this explainer. To his many, many enemies, Naosuke was a bloodthirsty, tyrannical dictator destroying the country's soul. But in his own highly logical, rule-bound mind, he was simply doing the ugly, necessary work to preserve Japan's 260 years of peace. Part 5. Legacy of Ichigo Ichi. Let's bring the pacing back down for a second, moving away from the blazing heat of his political purges and returning to the cold, biting snow of our opening scene. It's March 24, 1860. The karma of his solitary, iron-fisted decisions finally catches up to him. Enraged by the forced treaty and the brutal executions of the purge, a group of rebel assassins ambushed his palanquin at the Sakura Damen Gate. The Tairo's life violently ended right there in the snow. And with him, the absolute, unquestioned power of the shogunate suffered a fatal wound it would never recover from. But you have to remember, before he was this feared, ruthless dictator, he was that obscure, quiet youth. He was a master of the tea ceremony who wrote a famously beautiful book on the subject. And honestly, this deeply connects his violent end back to the philosophy he developed during those long years of isolation. In fact, he popularized a concept you might actually know today, Ichigo Ichie. It translates to once in a lifetime. It's the profound philosophy that every single encounter is unique, it will never repeat, and therefore it demands our absolute, irreversible commitment in that one single moment. For Naosuke, you see, this wasn't just about how to properly drink tea. It was his entire psychological framework for life. It was his willingness to make one-time, incredibly high-stakes decisions for the survival of his nation, fully accepting whatever bloody consequences followed. So, what do we actually take away from all this? Did the solitary Tairo's ruthless, unilateral decisions save Japan from becoming a colony? Or did his heavy-handed violence and the blood on the snow simply seal the fate of the samurai era? Was the flower of the buried wood a villainous dictator, or a tragic protector who sacrificed his own humanity for the sake of order? The line between the two is incredibly blurred. Think on that for a bit, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.